It's a very common thing for people these days to say something like, "Oh, I could never live back in XYZ time period. I would be so bored without modern technology like TVs, smartphones, or video games." But statements like this kind of reveal a hidden presentism bias because, yeah, sure, if you were plucked straight out of the present day and dropped in a rice farming village somewhere in ancient Vietnam, after the initial shock, you'd definitely be extremely bored with the monotonous lifestyle that, you need to keep from starving to death. It's just that it's a little ridiculous to imagine that for 99% of human existence, 99% of people were just constantly bored out of their minds 24/7, 365/52, just because, they didn't have the latest iPhone. Since, Benjamin Franklin said that the only things guaranteed in life were death and taxes, not death, taxes, and an unending void in the pit of your soul that you can never fill up no matter what you do to keep yourself occupied. And that's what's inspired me to make this video. So let's take a look back at the long, sluggish, and apathetic history of boredom in different cultures. In marketing, you have to cater to your target audience, and my target audience is pretty much anybody and everybody because of how small my channel is right now. And Google says that most of the anybodies and everybody's in the world live east of the Indus River and west of the Pacific Ocean. So that's what we'll discuss first. In ancient China, there was a Taoist philosopher by the name of Zhuangzi who separated boredom into two categories: inattentional boredom and epistemic boredom. If you've ever attended an orchestra performance, you'll understand inattentional boredom right away. Imagine you're listening to a beautiful symphony with all types of motifs, cliches, harmonies, and whatnot, and you can't seem to focus on the music without drifting into thinking about, I don't know, how long a dolphin can hold its breath underwater, or your top 10 NBA players ranking. This isn't necessarily because, you have ADHD and you need to be put on Adderall right away, contrary to what 9 out of 10 doctors might tell you, but because the different sounds and emotions are so complex that you simply don't know what to feel or you're just too exhausted to keep focus. You could draw a parallel in the modern day to scrolling through social media. One second you're laughing your skin off, the next you're thinking about, the socioeconomic state of Bangkok, Thailand, and the next you're back to laughing again. But in the end, you're apathetic. Epistemic boredom, on the other hand, is a lot closer to feeling like you're the one conscious drop of water in the Atlantic Ocean. It's essentially the idea that a person recognizes their epistemic limitation, whether that's confusion, bias, or realizing you've been living in the same online echo chamber for the past 10 years and forgotten what a shower looks like. Zhuangzi suggested two methods for freeing yourself from epistemic boredom. The first is something he called the fasting of the mind. The same way that you would fast your stomach from food or your ears from music, he suggested that you should let go of the things that form the boundaries of your worldview, such as social conventions or traditions. The other was basically just, letting your mind wander freely into any type of thinking without a fixed path set in mind, like playing the video game on explore mode. Side note, to respectfully simplify the history of Chinese philosophy in a quick but educational way, the decline of the Zhao dynasty from 770 to 476 BC was known as the spring and autumn period in which Confucius was born. Confucius would set the stage for the intellectual climate of the Warring States period over the course of his lifetime with his philosophy of Confucianism, which was meant to promote social order and filial piety because of the declining power of the Zhao. The Warring States period was from around 475 to 221, by the way. Around the same time of the Warring States period, two other Chinese philosophies would take shape: legalism and Taoism. To put it simply, legalism was entirely centered around politics and how to run a state, and Taoism was more about living in harmony with the natural way of the universe, or Tao, and preferred a smaller government. The two most important early Taoist thinkers were Lao Tzu and the one we're concerned with today, Zhuangzi. The Qin dynasty unified China and had legalism as its governing philosophy, but it was a little bit too authoritarian. Later, what was considered to be the first golden age of China would begin under the Han dynasty, which had a more balanced approach with Confucianism as its governing philosophy. Taoism would provide a more indirect counterbalance by influencing emperors spiritually. Also, Buddhism came along somewhere along the line on the Silk Road around the decline of the Han dynasty, and eventually it became one of the three teachings in China alongside Taoism and Confucianism that governed Chinese art, ethics, and politics. I said all of that just to say that sometimes Chinese philosophers would have funny disagreements with each other, like Diogenes defeathering a chicken, because Zhuangzi liked to use Confucius, who is also known in Chinese as Kongzi, as a character to make a point, even though he was long dead by that point. So he would say something like in Confucius's dead mouth's words like, using your Ji plans, do not listen with your ears, but listen with your mind. Do not listen with your mind, but listen with your Qi. Listening stops with the ear. The mind stops with signs. Qi is empty and waits on external things. Only the way gathers in emptiness. Emptiness is the fasting of the mind. Meanwhile, in the Christian world, boredom, or something very close to it, was taken very seriously. Enter Evagrius Ponticus, a 4th century monk who basically turned the Egyptian desert into his and his friends' personal spiritual gym. Evagrius wasn't talking about being bored while waiting for Netflix. He identified 8 principal evil thoughts, one of which was acedia. This wasn't just, this was this wasn't just, I don't know what to do. It was a creeping spiritual malaise, a kind of mental fog that made you question, were you even alive or dead? Evagrius devoted his life to meditation, fasting, and contemplation to fight these thoughts, treating boredom as a real threat to the soul. Later, the Church simplified Evagrius's list into 7 deadly sins. In Pope Gregory the Great's reorganization, acedia was absorbed into tristitia, or spiritual sadness, a category that later evolved into what we now call sloth. The moral warning remained intact. Boredom, despair, and disengagement from spiritual purpose were still seen as dangerous. So while Evagrius offered a psychologically precise map of inner struggle, the medieval framework distilled it into a more accessible, if less exact message. Don't surrender to spiritual inertia, or your inner life will decay. Going back in time to ancient Greece, boredom was less demoralized but no less serious. Socrates famously took a skeptical eye to the rhetoricians, the professional persuaders who could make any argument convincing regardless of its truth. Socrates argued that focusing on superficial appearances or empty arguments was a kind of spiritual boredom in itself. Even if you were never bored in the sense of feeling restless, a life spent chasing hollow distractions or performing for social status was empty. The remedy, like with Zhuangzi or Evagrius, was reflection, self-knowledge, and engagement with things that actually mattered. Buddhism, which arrived in China around the decline of the Han Dynasty, like I said earlier, added another perspective. Buddhist thought identifies the human mind's attachments and aversion cycles as central to suffering, which often includes what we might call boredom, dissatisfaction with the present moment. Boredom in this context isn't a Boredom in this context isn't a moral failing or a spiritual attack. It's an opportunity to recognize the mind's cravings. Meditation and mindfulness are the tools to confront it, turning restless energy into awareness, instead of allowing it to metastasize into existential ennui. Think of it as Evagrius's acedia, but less punitive and more pragmatic. Fast forward to the modern industrialized world, and things get really messy. Industrialization and urbanization created a separation between activity and meaning. In pre-modern societies, every activity, farming, crafting, trading, had an immediate purpose, and people's attention was naturally tethered to survival, community, or ritual. But factories, offices, and mass entertainment created empty blocks of time, periods where humans could do anything but often found themselves suspended in purposelessness. Philosophers like Pascal and Schopenhauer, and later modern psychologists noticed the same thing. More options, more leisure, and more stimulation ironically produced more boredom, not less. The Buddhist, Christian, and Taoist perspectives converge here in an interesting way. Boredom signals a disconnect between the mind and meaningful engagement. For Zhuangzi, it was epistemic boredom. For Evagrius, acedia. For the Buddhists, a restless mind caught in craving. And in the modern world, that disconnect is amplified because we have endless stimuli but fewer natural anchors for meaning. Social media, streaming, and endless news cycles keep us busy but rarely fulfilled. We've basically taken the most existential challenges of our ancestors, restlessness, listlessness, reflection, and turned them into a constant low-grade irritation that comes with Wi-Fi and push notifications. So next time you scroll your phone, sighing, "I'm so bored," So next time you scroll your phone sighing, ugh, I'm so bored, remember you're participating in a millennia old conversation. Humans from Socrates to Zhuangzi to Evagrius to the Buddha have wrestled with the same sensation. And maybe the takeaway isn't to eliminate boredom entirely, because, that's impossible, but to notice that it's a signal, a subtle nudge that maybe your life isn't engaging with the things that matter most. Boredom isn't a failure, it's an ancient, slightly uncomfortable reminder that meaning is sometimes something you have to look for, not something delivered on demand by a streaming service. If you've enjoyed the video or gotten any value from it at all, I would like you to please like, share, and subscribe. This is Little Known History signing out.